My name is Tamara Loring, and I'm with the Entrepreneur Source, and I'm so honored to have our guest, Jeremy Ames, CEO and co-founder of Guidant Financial, here with us because he will help us demystify what entrepreneurship and business ownership is all about. Many people won't even dare to dream about self sufficiency because it seems so lofty and it seems so unachievable. But today, Jeremy and I will explore all types of business models. Because if there's one thing that I have learned is that one size does not fit all. And entrepreneurship really spans the gamut. I never used to identify with being an entrepreneur, but that doesn't mean that I cannot pursue entrepreneurial endeavors. That does not mean that I can't work on my own dream. So we will talk about some personal insights that Jeremy will share with us, multiple vehicles, multiple different business models, and absolutely we'll talk about ways to fund a business. Our goal is to help you create a vision for your future and break it down into manageable steps and clear priorities. What do you say, Jeremy? Are you ready?
I'm super happy to be here, and I'm glad you set the bar real low tomorrow. All we have to do is just solve all the world's problems when it relates to people achieving their dreams. So let's go.
Let's go. Well, one of the things that really intrigued me about your background and your origin story is your insights into your entrepreneurial journey. So I would love for you to share a little bit more about that with us.
Okay. Well, I went to college thinking I was going to be a teacher, and I got to my student teaching, and I thought to myself, I am miserable. I do not want to do this. And so instead of continuing to rack up debt, I actually quit college. And I ended up in the restaurant industry. And I did that for a number of years, got a chance to travel around the country, opening and managing restaurants. And eventually that led me back to my home state of Washington. And there was a real pivotal moment for me. And I'm going to bring this up because I think this may be relevant for some people who maybe are in a corporate job and feeling like it's not quite clicking. I had been in this new job for 3 months and I was killing it. I was there 60 hours a week. I had rebuilt the whole merch program for this company. I had taken our worst performing evening and turned it into the busiest night of the week with some promos that I had put together. And I was sort of on cloud nine about how things were going. And the assistant general manager pulls me aside one day and says, Jeremy, we need to talk. And I am thinking, Tamara, it's about time someone acknowledges me for all these awesome things I'm doing. And she sits me down at this table and she just starts laying into me. And her whole message was, Jeremy, it feels like everything you're doing is trying to put down and make all the other managers look bad, including me. And I'm just sitting here dumbfounded, tears coming down my face, like, what is happening? And I remember being in shock for a couple of days. And ultimately, I came in a couple days later and put in my 2 weeks notice. And I've never worked in a restaurant since, but I had to figure out what was I going to do now, right? I'd already sort of bailed on the education thing. I had bailed on this career I had been building in the restaurant industry. And so I went and decided to get my real estate license. And ultimately that didn't end up being the career that I landed in. But what it did is it gave me a connection point where I started to meet some actual entrepreneurs. Now, before that point in time for me, I'd never known any business owners. I didn't have any in my family. I didn't have any in my personal network. But when I got into this industry, I started to meet some people who had started their own companies. And it wasn't long before I had this idea of something that I wanted to pursue. And I felt inspired by what some of these other people had done. And that led to the first company I set up, which I wouldn't say is a failure because it was around for 12 years and we ended up merging it into a well-known franchise brand and ultimately selling it. But I would tell you, it never did anything magical from a financial standpoint. What it did was open the door for me to business ownership. It is ultimately what led to all the other things that I've been able to do since. And, the reason I'll bring up a couple of those things is because I think it's relevant to the conversation. So since that moment in time, and that was, 24 years ago, I've had the chance to co-found 6 companies. My wife and I have been franchisees of 3 different brands. We've had a chance to do a couple of different business acquisitions. And so I bring that up not to brag because not all of those actually went particularly well. Some of them were bombs and some of them did great. But what has been true is that I've walked all the paths. There are really 3 paths to business ownership, right? You can acquire an existing business, you can start a franchise, or you can do a complete startup yourself. I've done them all. I've walked the path. I've taken my lumps and my bruises. I've learned what's true about me. and what I want and where my skill set lies. And in addition to that, one of my companies that you mentioned, Guidant Financial, it's been around for about 21 years. We have helped 35,000 people become business owners. So not only have I done it myself, but I've had a chance to be a sort of front row observer to lots of other people, especially people who are at sort of the midpoint of their career, thinking about what might be next, and all the struggles they go through to try and figure out what that thing is that they want to do that's next and how they sort of connect the dots.
Oh my gosh. So much there, Jeremy. And thank you for sharing that origin story, right? Because I think sometimes people self select out thinking that the title entrepreneur is reserved just for, a select few, the visionary maverick that's always known what they wanted to do and they were going to change and conquer the world. And what I'm hearing is every step of the way, you knew your potential. You didn't quite know where you wanted to go, but you weren't afraid to at least try different things. And you probably learned as much from the things that didn't work as you did from the things that worked, right? Whether that was that experience with that manager where you thought they're going to bring you in and praise you because you just saved the day and you just, really did something amazing for the organization, only to realize that you were too good, right? And you were a threat to other people, right down to some of the pros and cons of some of the business formats that you spoke about. So I don't want to call you an accidental entrepreneur, but it feels like the experience right before the one you had prep you for the next step. So there are definitely some pros and cons. And I would like for you to dig a little bit deeper about starting a business from scratch versus, you mentioned franchise businesses. I imagine many people listening to our session today may have some misperceptions or conceptions of what a franchise is and isn't, to maybe investing in a pre-existing business. So why don't you break that down for us?
Well, first of all, Tamara, one thing I want to point out from what you said is that I can almost guarantee you 95% of the people that are on this call right now have more skills, network, and resources than I had when I started my first two businesses. So, I mean, there's lots of stories we tell ourselves and can justify about what's getting in the way of us pursuing our dreams. But I promise you all are probably way more accomplished and way smarter and know a lot more people and a lot more things than I did. I will give just a little bit of context when I think about the three different business models and what I've learned about the sort of pros and cons of them. And I'm going to start with startups because that's where I actually started, was with a startup. And the pros of a startup are that you have complete freedom to create whatever it is you want from scratch. And there's real fun in that if you're somebody who's creative, maybe a little bit of a rebel, you don't necessarily want people telling you what to do, that can be really fun and really energizing. The con with the startup is of all the three models that are there, it is by far the riskiest because you're starting something without a proven customer, without a proven product, and you've got to build it all from scratch. And that can be a really big challenge for people in the early stages because you kind of have to be everything. You have to be 12 different people. You've got to be the expert in your company on a bunch of things you probably don't have any business being the expert in, but that's the nature of getting started in a startup. But the other benefit of a startup is that you can do it with very little cash. In fact, my first company, we started with about $3,000 put on credit cards, right? So you have a lot of freedom from that realm. Business acquisitions is one that has been getting a lot of attention lately, right? And it's because one of the biggest pros of a business acquisition is that it is probably the least risky of all of the paths to business ownership. And it's because you're walking into not just a proven client base, but a proven model, financial system that you can measure that's already been out there and producing. The biggest con of that is that you're going to pay a premium for that certainty, right? So if you're walking into an existing business, that's going to be the most expensive option. So if you're somebody who has access to resources, you have the ability potentially to go out there and get a loan, that might be a really good option, especially if you're the kind of person who maybe you don't want to start something from scratch, but you really like the idea of taking something that already exists and sort of tweaking it and modifying it and making it a little bit better. I think that's true for a lot of people who end up really successful in management careers. And then franchise is the other option that I think a lot of people overlook. And it's an interesting sort of hybrid between the two because it has a little more risk than what you would see in buying an existing business, because typically with a franchise, you're actually building the unit up from scratch, right? You're building a new location, you're hiring employees for the first time. But the difference is you're doing it with a proven model, right? Something that's already been validated in other markets and with other entrepreneurs. And you're doing it with the support of somebody who has an incentive to make sure that you're successful. That's a big part of how franchises work, right? So franchisors don't make money when you buy a franchise. They make money when you open your doors and can start driving revenue and stay in business for a long period of time. And so that alignment is a little different than what you might see in a business acquisition, where you have a seller who maybe is trying to sell you the business and just get out, as opposed to a franchisor who's really a partner for you along the way. And, the one thing I'll point out as a pro that I see and have lived from being in franchise models before, I think the biggest overlooked benefit of franchises is the other network of franchisees. Because I will tell you, you're going to learn more from peers who are operating businesses than anyone else as a business owner. And the advantage of being in a franchise concept is now you have access to a bunch of people who not only are smart and capable in operating businesses, but they're operating businesses that are so closely aligned to what you do that there's a massive amount you can learn from them about things they're trying that are working and not working. You can go find the five most successful people in a particular brand and pick their brain about what they do to drive clients and hire employees. And that's much harder to do in just a typical business, to find somebody who has that sort of industry expertise that you can really lean on.
Yeah, the interesting thing, and thank you, for taking us through all the different kind of models, right? From, being the one who has to ideate it, bootstrap it and start it from scratch, to plugging in into an existing model, to franchising. I mean, if you're listening to the session right now, one of the things I would say, be careful about the stories that you're telling yourself, and maybe some of the beliefs you have about each and every single vehicle, right? There are pros and cons to startups. Yes, Jeremy spoke about the fact that many of them, may be high risk, but it depends. Right? Plugging into an existing model. Again, pros and cons there. And franchising, absolutely. I remember myself coming from the hospitality industry. I thought I knew what franchising was, and I didn't want to have any part to do with it because I thought it was all about fast food and French fries. It wasn't until I realized that franchising is just a method of doing business whereby you get to plug into an already proven system. And you're absolutely right, Jeremy, right? It's not just being in business for yourself, but not by yourself. It's that community that you get to plug into also. So it really depends on your appetite. It depends on your experience, and it depends on the life that you're looking to create, to really look at all of these business models and look at the pros and cons of every single one of them to really figure out where you're at in life and what's going to work best for you and your family right now. I know another thing that I hear a lot, Jeremy, is when people say like, well, business ownership or entrepreneurship is not for me because I do not have the funds. I don't have deep pockets. So therefore, I just have to work for somebody else. What do you say to that?
Usually I ask them, well, what have you looked into so far? Because in my experience, most people haven't done any of the work to actually figure out. They just assume that in order to start a business, they have to have $500,000 in cash sitting in their checking account doing nothing. And I don't know how many people have that, but not very many. Right. But there are tons of options out there, and they really fall generally in two buckets, right? You have different forms of debt, and then you have different forms of sort of equity or assets. Now, those names may sound confusing, but when we think about debt, a common one that people think about is SBA financing. And the reason is because SBA financing is a really common way that people buy small businesses. The government has built this program that makes it much more likely that bank lenders will lend you money for these small business transactions, right? So that can be a really good fit for people. But there are other borrowing options out there that people may not even know about. Most people don't know that if you have a whole life insurance policy, there's ways to borrow against that whole life insurance policy that you can also structure as a write-off for the business. Same thing is true if you have some portfolio of stocks, right, that you don't want to sell because you may get hit with a bunch of tax implications of it. But there's equipment financing in certain types of businesses. I mean, this is where it really gets into some business specific stuff when you think about where are lenders willing to put dollars in place because there's some underlying basis to secure that money. And then when we come to the equity piece, yes, it could be money in your checking account, but it could also be maybe equity in your home. In fact, this is a common one that I really encourage people to do is before you go quit your job and decide you are all in for owning a business, for sure, if you have equity in your home, go get a HELOC. You may not ever use it, but this is the beauty of a HELOC. You don't have to use it, but you can have it there and access it. It's inexpensive money and you can use it if and when you need it. But other forms of assets, a lot of people don't know that you can use retirement funds to invest in a company if you structure it properly. In fact, that's a lot of what we've done at Guidant over the years, is help people use retirement funds to make an investment in a small business where your retirement plan, your 401k or your IRA, actually becomes an owner of the business. And there are others like unsecured financing. I mean, we probably don't need to get them all into all of those here. We've got a pretty extensive guide if people want to look at just a whole host of things that are out there, but there's lots of options. So go do the work and find out. I mean, worst case scenario, you're going to confirm that you don't have the resources, but you're also going to learn what kind of things might actually be a fit for you. And it may help you strategically think about how you want to manage your finances going forward. So for example, my wife and I, we have a whole life insurance policy. We do that on purpose because we need to have a life insurance policy to protect if something were to happen to us, but we also like the ability that we can go back and leverage the cash balance of that insurance policy if we want to do that, either to take advantage of an opportunity or to deal with some point in time where cash might be a challenge.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So, really what you're talking about is it's all about learning. It's about education, awareness, and discovery. And it also sounds like learn about how businesses are funded, right? Even if you haven't found the perfect business yet, right? Because it may change what you look at and vice versa. So there's no reason to stop one and wait till you find the perfect business and then figure out how you're going to fund it. Because like you said, you may find what you think is a perfect business. You may be all in, you may quit your job only to realize like now you cannot secure that HELOC.
Which, Tamara, is funny because none of us would go out and think we're going to buy a house by just driving around, find a house we think looks beautiful, and then we put an offer in on it. Almost all of us start by going to the bank and saying, how much can we get approved for? So we understand what the budget is when we go out and go shopping. People don't always do that with businesses. And I think part of it is because they may feel like they're committing to a business by going out to do the exploration to see what they are able to finance. But it really can just help you understand what are the options that are available to you so you can start to narrow down. I mean, I like to tell people there is no constraint you have that completely takes business ownership off the table, but it will limit the options that you may have available to you today.
Right. And it's really about comparing and contrasting, right? So it's adding that one more element, right? Where would the funding be able to come from? You spoke about many things that are not even on people's radar, being able to leverage some of the assets, right, that they already have. And then learning about the different types of business models that really would have the potential to help people create this life that they're looking for as it relates to the income, the lifestyle, and longer term wealth and equity. And I think one of the things people tell themselves often too is, I don't know whether business ownership is right for me or not because I don't have any experience being an entrepreneur or being a business owner. I think your story was very compelling because you said several things. One, you didn't start off thinking you were going to be a business owner. Secondly, you also didn't have any experience. And thirdly, you said, we probably are better educated in some ways as it relates to what business opportunities are available, or maybe even better prepared. So I would love for you to maybe bring it home and talk about, some of those things that I touched.
Yeah. I mean, did you ever have experience riding a bike before you rode a bike, or experience driving a car before you drove a car? I mean, anything we do for the first time, we're not going to be able to say we have experience doing it. It doesn't mean you don't have skills and experience that can translate into that next thing, right? So maybe you haven't driven a car before, but maybe you've driven a golf cart. Maybe you haven't ridden a bike, but maybe you have one of those push toddler things. Those things are brilliant, by the way, for teaching toddlers to learn balance before they ever have to learn about the pedal thing. There are things that people have done in their lives that have potentially prepared them for this. I think where people get tripped up is with what I call this myth of 110% commitment. And I think it comes from a good place. It comes from this intuitive understanding that to be successful in business, you've got to be 110% committed. The problem is we get the timing of that wrong. And we think that the second that we say that dream out loud that we want to be a business owner, that's the point that we have to be 110% committed. And I would say you're starting with the wrong question. It means you're starting with this question of, should I be a business owner? And you're just spinning yourself up about this question over and over again. But yet You've done none of the work to even define what that might look like. I don't know how you could make a major life decision with no data and no information. If you have no idea what's out there, if you have no idea what you can afford, if you have no clarity on what you want for your life, then how could you answer the question of should I be a business owner? You can't. So stop answering the question, should I, and start thinking about all the how would I questions. How would I finance this? How would I make this work and still be able to take my kids to school? How would I find a business that I could be passionate about for 5 or 6 years and not get bored of? How would I make sure that I'm not compromising my family's financial future? You start with those how questions. Now you can start working on something that's important. And I talk to a lot of people who get in a point where they're stuck. And my prescription is always the same. It's stop asking the should question, list out all these how questions, and then get to work. You're not committing to anything by exploring the how questions. But one of two things is going to happen when you do. Either you're going to get far enough down those how questions that you're going to have conviction that business ownership's not right for you. Well, great. Now you can take that thing that you thought was your dream and put it to bed and not live the rest of your life in regret because you're going to know that wasn't for me. But maybe when you're doing all those how questions, you realize, wait a second, there is potentially a path here. And now you're in a position where you can actually answer the should question because you got enough detail to say, this is what it would look like. This is how we would make it work. This is what it's going to require of me. Am I ready to give that? If so, then maybe the decision's yes, and you're ready to go. If not, maybe it's now is not the right time. I need to wait until the kids are out of high school and then I'm going to do this thing or whatever the decision point is. But you owe it to yourself and to your dreams to go do the work. If you're not even willing to do that, then it's not really a dream. It's sort of a wish. And I would just say all of us have the same dreams and same desires. What separates the people who are successful from the people who are not successful is that the successful people actually do work on figuring those things out.
So compelling. Which leads me to the final question I have for you, Jeremy. Is there anything you wish you would have known about entrepreneurship before exploring it?
I wish I would have known how valuable it can be to tap into resources and learn before you get started. I feel so incredibly lucky, Tamara, to be where I'm at because I know how many stupid mistakes I made along the way. And I can look at it and go, realistically, if we played out the multiverse, 1,000 situations of Jeremy's life, there are maybe 2 that end up in this particular place the way that they landed. And I'm so overwhelmed by the amount of information and access to resources and coaches out there that people can get to put themselves in a position to be successful and not have to take those lumps and not have to take the same amount of risk. Like, I think Bill Gurley is the one who said this, but he says, you have no excuse for not being an expert in anything you want to be an expert in. That is the world we live in now. It's never a question of, is the information available and out there? It's only a question of, are you willing to do the work to go figure it out? So, I would tell people, if you've got an itch, then scratch it. Go do some exploration. Go find a resource you can go talk to an existing business owner. Go find a coach who's done this before and start figuring out what that path might look like for you. You can always decide later whether it's the right path or not, but you're never going to find the path unless you start walking.
I love that. So, listeners, if you're serious about starting to work on your own dream, listen, it's not about serious about owning a business or not. It's just about doing the work and learning. There is no reason, like Jeremy said, why you have to figure all of this out all by yourself. I would absolutely encourage you connect with one of our coaches, one of our career ownership coaches. We can absolutely help you. A coach will help you really think about your thinking. A coach will help you get out of your current comfort zone, allow you to go to places you've never gone before. All you need to do is reach out to one of us here at the Entrepreneur Source, and we would be more than happy to connect you with a career ownership coach so that you can start exploring what possibilities may be right for you. Jeremy, any final thoughts?
As you asked me that, I just thought of, I have this ratty old t-shirt that I've had for 15 years. And on it, it just has 4 words. It says, don't quit your daydream. And that would be my message to everybody. Don't quit your daydream. You owe it to yourself. Go do the work to figure it out. Figure out if that's really your dream. And then if it is, go get it.
I love it. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
No, it's a pleasure.